Hi, lovely people. So today we are talking ballet composers, and whether you are a want-to-be professional dancer, you're an adult dancer, you're just a fan, or anywhere in the spectrum of ballet, you need to know these 6 composers. So let's get into it. The first one, of course, is the most famous ballet composer in the world, Peter Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, born in 1840, was a Russian composer whose work is celebrated for its emotional depth and melodic beauty. He was a pioneer in bringing symphonic qualities to ballet music, making it as central to the production as the choreography. He wrote the 3 most widely known ballets that exist in the repertoire: Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, and the Nutcracker. This is very recognizable music that pretty much anybody would know, even if you're not a ballet fan. If you hear this music, you're going to know it. Obviously, everyone knows the Nutcracker from Christmas. You hear it playing in, Target. And of course, Disney used his score for the animated film Sleeping Beauty. Not the other way around, by the way. Yes, Disney used Tchaikovsky's score for the animated feature. So this is a composer that even if you don't know his name, you know his music. He worked directly with Marius Petipa on Sleeping Beauty. Petipa would say, I need this kind of solo, I need this kind of piece, and Tchaikovsky would write it. The 2 worked hand in hand specifically for that ballet. Swan Lake, fun fact, when it first premiered, was very poorly received. Very, very poorly received. But now, of course, it has become one of the most iconic ballets of all time, and now, of course, being Black Swan, the movie, everybody knows it. Tchaikovsky also struggled with Nutcracker. There is a fantastic documentary, I'm going to link it below for you guys, about Tchaikovsky. He wrote Nutcracker in a very hard time in his life. His sister had just passed away, and so a lot of the music, he was very stuck on it and just couldn't, he was not inspired. But then the passing of his sister really just, it opened up the floodgates, and he was able to create the beautiful score that we know today. So that documentary is very, very interesting, and if you are interested in things like that, I will leave it below for you. Nutcracker, of the 3, was written last. A lot of people think Tchaikovsky made his name through Nutcracker. It was the last of the 3. A couple other ballets you might have heard of written by Tchaikovsky. A lot of Balanchine work was done to Tchaikovsky. Serenade, Diamonds, Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 2, which is often known as Ballet Imperial. Balanchine loved Tchaikovsky, and basically his music is synonymous with ballet. So, composer number 2 that you need to know. Balanchine, of course, is synonymous with this composer, Igor Stravinsky. Born in 1882, a Russian composer, revolutionized music with his daring innovations in rhythm, harmony, and structure. His collaborations with Sergei Diaghilev brought modernism to ballet. Stravinsky is one of those composers that you have to have a knowledge of what he was going for. It's a little bit harder to hear. It's very difficult to count. Thanks, Stravinsky. We love you so much. But some of his ballets, of course, that you would know: Firebird, Rite of Spring, Stravinsky Violin Concerto. Just so many iconic pieces, mostly short. And like Tchaikovsky and Petipa, worked directly with Balanchine. Balanchine was very inspired by Stravinsky, and often the 2 would work hand in hand to create these ballets. So Stravinsky first worked with Diaghilev for the Ballet Russe, and while he and Balanchine were both Russian, they did not actually meet until Diaghilev introduced them. So he worked with him first, Diaghilev introduced them, and then the partnership of Stravinsky and Balanchine became what it is today. As a dancer, you do develop an appreciation for Stravinsky, even though it is very difficult to hear. It's very hard to count. Speaking from experience, when you're rehearsing in the studio, oftentimes you'll just get the piano, and then when you get to the stage and you hear the orchestra for the first time, it sounds like an entirely different piece of music. So it is one of those acquired skills, and Stravinsky music really challenges dancers to listen and not just kind of do their own thing. Oftentimes when we were doing these ballets, there'd be like a 9 and a 13 and a 12 and a 6 and a 4 and an 8 and then a couple more 8s, and then you go back to a 7, and sometimes it structurally doesn't always make even sense. So he's one of those composers that as a dancer, you can't just go out there and do it do the movements. You have to really listen. So doing a Stravinsky ballet is a great way to develop musicality. The third composer is Léo Delibes, and he composed two very famous ballets, 𝐂𝐨𝐿𝐼A and 𝐂𝐾𝐿EA. Delibes, born in 1836, was a French composer known for his lyrical and expressive music. His ballets are celebrated for their charm, vivid orchestration, and memorable melodies. Of course, his most famous ballet is 𝐂𝐾𝐿EA, and it is such a charming, happy score with some moments in there of pure genius. I love the wedding pas de deux in Act 3, the mazurka in the opening. Waltz of the Hours is a very famous piece. It's probably another one of those ballets that you've heard this music before, even though you don't know where you've heard it. It is a very famous piece. However, not a lot of ballet companies do 𝐂𝐾𝐿EA. New York City Ballet does, Royal Ballet does, Pacific Northwest Ballet does, but for a while there was a lull in 𝐂𝐾𝐿EA. And now, more recently, companies are bringing it back. It is a very happy, charming evening. Nothing too deep. Nobody dies. It's very happy. 𝐂𝐨𝐴 is not very well known. Oftentimes, it will be done out of context. Balanchine did do a 𝐂𝐨𝐴 pas de deux that has nothing to do with the full length, but the Royal does do a full-length 𝐂𝐨𝐴. And it's not very common one, but it's a score that you probably have heard, even though you don't know you've heard it. The one piece you will know from 𝐂𝐨𝐴 is the pizzicato. Oftentimes, this music is used for comedic purposes. I've seen it used in commercials. It's, again, one of those pieces you're like, oh, I know this, but it's from the ballet 𝐂𝐨𝐴. Another piece by Delibes that I'm sure you would know or have heard before, it's from the opera 𝐼𝐴, and it is called The Flower Duet. That's also a piece by Delibes. He also contributed some music to Le Corsaire. Corsaire, we're going to get there in a minute, but Corsaire is kind of an amalgamation over the years of different composers, and he was one of them. Another fun fact about Delibes is he really inspired Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky loved his melodic qualities to his melodies. One I really want you to listen to is that third act wedding pas de deux in 𝐂𝐾𝐿EA. It's just beautiful. So the most famous ballet composer of all time was inspired by Delibes. Composer number 4 is one of my personal favorites, Sergei Prokofiev. Prokofiev was a Soviet composer whose music combined modernist techniques with lyrical beauty. His ballets are renowned for their narrative depth and character-driven themes. Prokofiev, of course, wrote Romeo and Juliet, my personal favorite ballet score, Cinderella, and Peter and the Wolf. Those are 3 ballets that I'm sure you have heard of. What's interesting to me about Prokofiev is the score of Romeo and Juliet is so lush, it's so romantic, some of it just sounds so beautiful. It's just, to me, the perfect score, and you can literally read Shakespeare's play with it, and it makes sense. It just, for me, it helped me understand the story. It is such a brilliant score. Cinderella, on the other hand, is a little bit, and I would love your opinion on this. Listening to Cinderella, it's a little bit dark, in my opinion. He kind of took a dark twist on Cinderella. It, to me, almost sounds a little more off than even Romeo and Juliet does, but there's a little more ominous quality to it. So that's what I find so interesting. His take on Cinderella is a little bit dark. There's some beautiful moments in it. The last pas de deux, to me, is the most beautiful music in the whole ballet, and her entrance into the ball. But like, even the waltz at the ball, there's this like ominous quality to it, and it could be, of course, the clock's going to strike 12, like you're on a time limit here. But I just find that really interesting that Romeo and Juliet is almost more lush and romantic, and Cinderella is a little bit darker, when the stories are kind of a little bit opposite. I mean, obviously Romeo and Juliet is romantic, but everybody dies. The thing I love about Prokofiev is every character does have a theme. Mercutio has a theme. Romeo has a theme. Juliet has a theme. Cinderella as well. Her entrance into the ball is similar and is almost the same music as the last pas de deux in the end. The fairy godmother has a theme. The stepsisters, he even uses certain instruments to signify certain characters. He does that more than any other ballet composer there is. He really has a knack for character themes. This is another one of those composers that even if you don't know him, you know his music. I am sure everybody has heard Dance of the Nights from Romeo and Juliet. There's even that video of the band that did the like music joke where they started playing Star Wars in the middle of the Dance of the Nights rehearsal. I'll link that below if I can find it. But this is another one of those composers that some of this music you have heard, you just don't know where you've heard it. A few other ballets that Prokofiev wrote that you might have heard of, like we said, Peter and the Wolf, not often done by ballet companies, but it's a very famous piece of music. Disney even animated to it. I'm sure you've heard it. Jerome Robbins actually has a very famous ballet to one of Prokofiev's violin concertos, his violin concerto in D major. It's called Opus 19, The Dreamer. It is such a beautiful ballet, short, about 20 minutes, but it is an abstract work that is, again, stunning. And the way he uses the violin, emotion to me is the number one word for Prokofiev. He just had the ability to convey deep, deep, deep emotion and character and just human feelings, more so than any other composer. It's not just about pretty music for a ballet. There's really deep, deep emotion in his work. The fifth composer is Adolphe Adam. Born in 1803, was a French composer celebrated for his contributions to romantic ballets and opera. His work is praised for its dramatic expressiveness and melodic charm. Of course, he composed Giselle, his most iconic piece. He also contributed to Le Corsaire, like we were talking about. And fun fact about Adolphe Adam that I'm not sure most people know, he wrote the very famous Christmas carol, O Holy Night. So Giselle and O Holy Night, same composer. The thing about Adolphe Adam for me with Giselle, it is such beautiful music. The Adagio, it's again another score that just touches your heartstrings, particularly the mad scene. He had the ability to story tell. Like, you can see the willies running by on the piccolo section of the mad scene. You can see the depth of despair at the end. You can see the forgiveness in his music. It's so, so beautiful. Giselle is, of course, considered one of the most famous, iconic ballets in the entire rep. But Adam was more of an opera composer, and he composed over 40 operas. So Giselle was kind of his one ballet, obviously contributing to Le Corsaire, but Giselle was that's pretty much all he did for ballet. He was more of an opera composer, which I think also contributes to that deep, deep emotion, because when you're writing for singers, they're literally going to spit it back out at the audience. So those sensibilities really, to me, carry over into Giselle. So the sixth and final composer you should know, there's so many more we could get into, but these are the six you should really, really know right now, is Ludwig, or also known as Léon Minkus. He goes by two different names. Léon Ludwig Minkus, born in 1826, was a composer of Austrian origin who became a prominent figure in Russian ballet. His music is celebrated for its tunefulness and suitability for storytelling through dance. Minkus served as the official ballet composer of the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow and later the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, where he collaborated with famed choreographers like Marius Petipa. He, of course, composed three very, 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 very famous ballets: Don Quixote, Paquita, and 𝐵𝐴. What's really interesting about him is the spectrum. So Don Quixote is the very famous ballet set in Spain, as is Paquita. So if you want to think of Don Quixote and Paquita as they're both full-length ballets, Don Quixote is set in sort of the town and village in Spain, and just sort of the more rustic story. Paquita is the Spanish royalty. So he composed these two different ballets, same vein. But then he also composed 𝐵𝐴, of course, set in India. 𝐵𝐴 meaning the temple dancer. All three very beautiful, distinct scores done by the same composer. Minkus was another master of creating this just emotional depth and almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Like brava. There's like gravitas to a lot of his music. Think of like the third act Don Quixote, think of the coda, Paquita, and all those variations. But then of course you have something beautiful like Shades, the entrance of Shades, where all the dancers come out. So again, this range and this depth that he had, I think really makes his scores what they are. And like Tchaikovsky, he also worked very, very closely with Petipa. So I think that's another reason, especially for a ballet like Don Quixote, it works so well because he worked directly with the choreographer. He could give Petipa exactly what he needed for the ballet. Oh, I need a such and such variation. Oh, I need a big group dance here. I think that's another reason it works so, so well. The full length Paquita is not done so much anymore, but often the third act is very, very famous. Obviously, the variations are all moved around and taken out of context and this and that, but there's probably more variations in Paquita than anywhere else. And what I find really interesting is the music is all coming back. People are really starting to bring Paquita back. New York City Ballet is doing a new Paquita. Aleksei Ratmansky is doing a Paquita for New York City Ballet, and that is not something I ever thought I would see. So I'm excited to see how that goes. They're premiering it quite soon. So I encourage you to go check that out on their social channels. I saw it the other day and I'm very, very, very intrigued by it. Kind of excited. So those are the 6 composers that you really, really do need to know. If you have any interest in ballet whatsoever or just want to sort of start your ballet journey, start with these 6. There are so many different composers and famous ballets and like, oh, an obscure composer over here, an obscure composer over here. There is a huge deep dive. We could do another, 60. But these are the ones that really, really you need to know. And if you want to be a professional dancer, I cannot encourage you enough. You need to know these scores. You need to know this music. You need to know that's from this ballet, that's this variation. Just have the knowledge. Because of how widespread social media and YouTube and all of this is now, it makes it very easy. But dancers, you got to know your music. You got to know your composers. You got to know your scores. You got to be able to hear them. You got to be able to hear and listen. And the more you have the ability to hear nuances within the scores, the more you have the ability to hear different notes, the better dancer you're going to be. So if you want to deep dive into musicality, where we kind of break down, different scores, different composers, let me know in the comments. If you have a favorite composer I did not mention, you can say it, let me know in the comments below. Love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.